Too often, Black women are a mere afterthought in conversations around wellness, but not in this space. On this podcast, the dialogue is always centered around women like you. Welcome to the podcast, but more importantly, welcome to the tribe. Bewellsis. So I am super excited to be talking to Junauda today. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to be on your podcast, Cassandra.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored that you are here. You are a woman of so many titles, so many things. You are a multi-passionate, and you're an author, you're a playwright, you are a pleasure activist, and I just want to dive into all of it. Before we do, there's one thing that we do share in common is that we are both of Caribbean descent.
Oh, yay.
Yes, Caribbean girls unite. So my question is, as somebody who is queer, as somebody who is a pleasure activist, how did your Caribbean background shape your identity and coming into your own personhood?
Yeah, I feel like that's an interesting question to think about, because I think so much of Caribbean culture is a centering of pleasure, is a defaulting to pleasure. My mother's from Trinidad, and my father's from St. Croix. And I was raised in the Midwest, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But I feel like when I think of my aunties, like on my mom's side of the family, like they were just always cracking jokes, no matter what, they were going through, or holding or navigating, like even trauma and things that were tragic were told for comic relief in a certain kind of way. I think, sort of having capacity to allow the relief of survival to, like when you're like running from something that's like, oh my God, and then you're just kind of like, I feel like activation. This cat really is wanting to like upstage me today. She never does that. She's a sweet cat. Anyway, and I definitely feel, just the pleasure of the elements. Like when I think of the islands in the Caribbean, so much of it is thinking about the ocean waves and the sensory feel of them and the sound of them and the soothing of them. I think of the lush greenness, the fruit, the ability to grab something alive to eat year round. To me, like there's pleasure in that. There's activism in being able to, nourish yourself off the land in the ways that I think people in the Caribbean, have access to for sure. And definitely how my family grew up and, continues to live. Mm-hmm. So also my queerness, I think so much of Caribbean identity and Caribbean culture has been shaped by Caribbean queerness, even though there's often this stigma because, like a lot of countries and regions that have been colonized, by Europe and by the religiosity of oppression or the oppression of religiosity, like a lot of what was attacked first was gender divergence from these norms and, queerness and powerful feminist women. Like I was actually reading yesterday about some of these maroon queen mothers of Jamaica and St. Croix in particular. These, Black, wild healers, witch women, Obeah women, all that, who were the ones who led the resistance, whether it was, is it Queen Nanny and sorry, my cat is like being so wild today.
She wants cuddles.
Yeah, totally. Our kid isn't here right now, and that's like her cuddle buddy. Found a little bag to nestle in, and anyways, I take pleasure in my cat too, so that's a pleasure active thing. But I was gonna say back to thinking about the Queen Nanny in Jamaica. And as well as Queen Mary and St. Croix, like these were the women who, and Queen Mary's example, created these maroon villages, like escaped and resisted, and all these different sort of places of enclave and survival within, and then with the case of Queen Nanny and I forget the name of or Queen Mary, the other revolutionaries, I think Queen Agnes and Queen Matilda, were these women who were healers and, witches and brujas who also were resisting and whatnot. So I feel for me, especially being a kid of the diaspora and always feeling very connected to the Caribbean, but also very distanced because I was raised here. I think part of being an artist is part of that reclamation, both of the queerness within Caribbean culture and also the Caribbeanness within my Blackness, So, yeah. Are you born in the islands or were you born in the States?
Nope, I was born in the States. So I was born in New Jersey. My parents are Haitian, which is why I asked that question. And I feel like what you just said, that last piece, I definitely resonate with, being a child of the diaspora. So I was born here. It's like being part of two cultures, two worlds that are similar, but distinct in a way. Yeah, for sure. So for the podcast and also just from my life, I've just been trying to imagine a new future. So the podcast really, we talk a lot about wellness and how to, unlearn some things that we've been taught about ourselves, right? And just really to find out who we are for ourselves, what makes us happy, what brings us joy, what makes us whole. And one thing that I have been fighting with, I'm not sure that's the right word, but I feel that there's so much, no matter how much work I do on myself, the world that we live in or the country that we currently live in, the strife, it like undoes all the things that I do constantly. So I'm trying to open up my mind and also challenging the listeners to also expand themselves and their view of what life could look like. So I'm coming to you as a person who is great at reimagining a new world and reimagining how we do things. Have you always been imaginative, or is this something that you've had to kind of cultivate in a way?
I think both end actually. Like, I think I've always been imaginative. I've always been daydreamy. I've always been creative, in a way that I think I didn't understand where that would be a valuable expression of myself. Like, I also felt very much like that was a part of myself I had to repress, had to hide, had to deny. And so I think this is the case with a lot of artists, with a lot of Black folks, with a lot of queer folks. Like, so much of our natural flow and expression is either criminalized or undermined or extracted from in our society, or all of those things. So, you repress or hide that part of yourself to survive. So I do think, yes, it's natural. And then the cultivation really did come in my late 20s, where I sort of was in a moment, Saturn return for the astrology people in the room, where I was like, okay, either I feel like there's parts of me that I've repressed and that it's choking me and suffocating me, that I'm holding these things back. And mainly there were the fact that I was an artist and wanted to be that with all my might. And the other was my queerness. And even in addition to queerness, like my hoishness, like I think there an aspect of Black femme sexuality that often forces us to feel like, oh, you got to be a good girl, you got to be, a good woman, you got to be, or all of these sort of, there's a particular Black patriarchy that happens, I think, to Black femme bodies, because we're dealing with the ways that Blackness is subjected to judgment and criminalization and hatred, and femmehood is, and the intersections of those things, misogynoir, really feels acute and really feels like in order to prove our worth, we need to somehow deny any of these stigmas. And I feel like part of this reclamation, even in talking around my Caribbean identity and how that lives in my Black American identity, because I also feel Black American and I also feel Black Caribbean, is this idea that like, oh yeah, I'm a person that wants, I'm a person that desires, I'm a person that is curious about things and wants to feel how those things feel like. I think so. At that time in my life, like my late 20s, I really started to kind of deal with the pressure of holding all of myself back from myself. So yeah, I think that um, I'm glad that I did cultivate that within myself. And I think it's a part of my work too, where in one way or another, it's like some kind of reclamation, so whether it's, my first book really talking about like Black, queer, young sexuality and desire and feelings and all of that. Or my new book where it's like, okay, well, so much of what care looks like today comes from, the space of, Black woman care, often forced labor, forced positioning of care, but also our natural capacity. And a lot of women's natural capacity to kind of see and intuit and empathize. And I think, with the, my Can We Please Give the Police Department to the Grandmothers, which is my kids' book, a lot of it is how do we use these reflections and embodiments of healing and magic as our goalposts for how we sort of heal our society versus continuing to invest in a police state that was established at the beginning and time frame of slavery, indigenous removal, the absolute non-existence of women's rights. That is the ethos and culture that the police state was created in, and no matter how people try to rebrand it, it's sort of like it gonna be what it gonna be. It's kind of like when neighborhood and they start giving it new names and it's like it's still that same neighborhood, or y'all call it avocado toast now, but us in the islands was bread and zabuka or whatever.
Yep.
Anyhow, so I guess that's definitely just naming that, like, we're always naturally who we are, but so much of our society forces us to assimilate, and then we have to fight to claim ourselves again.
So beautifully put. One thing that I was thinking about is how even if we reclaim who we are, there's also this struggle for it not to be completely extracted from us. Like our creativity, like we're always fighting the system that is capitalism as well as racism, as well as sexism, right? So my question for you is, how do you as a creative being still create, still find pleasure, still we still have to fend for ourselves, like, so take care of yourself without being exploited and being sucked into the system? And I'm not sure if that's like a too vague of a question.
No, I think it's a question I ask myself, actually. Like, how do I be who I am creatively? How do I actually focus on the ritual and the kind of devotion work that I think creativity sort of is fun? That's what I like about it. To me, it feels like ritual. It feels like a spiritual practice. Yeah. It feels like exciting conversations with my ancestors and other spirits. And it feels as though I'm being channeled through. Mm-hmm. To me, when I think of art or experience art, it really, when I'm in it, it's this otherworldly experience. And we live in a very, sort of world where we do have to provide for ourselves in these very tangible, capitalistic ways that at times, and I think inherently is at odds with a spiritual artistic practice. And I think, social media is a thing that I often am like, ugh, like there's times where I like really am, I'm having fun on this thing. Yeah, look at me. Likes, likes, likes. And then there's other times where I'm like, this evil, complicated, mind scrambling. Like, I just went to Ross Gay. I don't know if you know Ross Gay, who's, this really awesome writer. Yes. And he's like a complete Luddite, essentially. Like, he's all about nature, all about disconnecting. And I forget the elaborate name he has for cell phones, but something like mind guzzling, soul scrambling type, like super adamantly against cell phones, which there's a part of me that's very much that way. And I also feel so pulled to participate in, what is an inherently very capitalistic, brand, essentializing your life, your existence to sort of this very singular, medium that is often contorted, and contorting to me. So I think what I'm interested in as of recently, like actually before I got on this podcast with you, I was walking with my wife and really thinking about how do I plan and prepare to live in rhythms that feel conducive to being an artist, that feel conducive to my health and my well-being and my spiritual commitments, because it's so easy to be consumed in your phone for way too much time, to feel kind of this like low level fog of brain energy, like, oh, I can't really delve deep into books. I can't really delve deep into writing sometimes. So I feel what I've really been interested in is like, how do I protect and cultivate a space so that I could live, completely in this realm of artistic, spiritual delving and deepening that I think is where my richest, most meaningful healing work comes from. While also having to participate or feel like I have to participate on some level with, popping on social media. Sometimes it's great. Like, I posted about my family doing a cat birthday party yesterday, like same cat that's walking across this, platform. So she's feeling herself clearly because she was celebrated and Sprite was lifted in the air by 9-year-olds and her feline, and it was so cute. And I was like, oh, I want to share that. And I'm promoting a book right now, so I'm sharing that. But it also feels like then my focus becomes more phone focused. And I feel like that has felt like a cutoff for my creativity that I've often been trying to figure out, like, okay, why do I feel so attached to this, even though I don't believe in it or, agree with the way that it impacts me and others? And there's times I'm looking at it and I'm laughing and I love the things I'm learning on it. So I guess to answer your question is that I'm questioning that exact thing, is like, how do I, and, you asked about the capitalism of it all. And I think for me, that's where I go to, where the capitalism feels to like lay into my life, is when on the daily, I feel like I participate in some of these things that maybe don't feel good to me, or maybe feel like, so what, Ross was talking about was, just everybody's looking in their phone instead of looking outside and seeing what a squirrel is doing. That might actually help cultivate something about your writing or your brain or whatever in a certain kind of way. And I don't know, and it doesn't have to be absolute either way. But it is a thing that I think in this age of when so much of art is actually people commodifying their creativity on social media, right? Yeah. Where it's like, oh, hey, like there's things that it's so brilliant that like years ago, people would have to like work hard to get access to be shown on a show and maybe never ever be, off hands. But now people can do it for themselves. But then the work is like, well, how do I commodify it? And still the powers that be are able to be like, oh, hey, we have a TikTok house and all these white kids are going to make bank while all the Black kids cultivate the creativity. So yeah, I feel like these are just very deep and in real time questions, I think be asking themselves. Because even me, I'm like, all of this writing, like I'm not going to put a whole bunch of writing all the time on social media, because I'm like, I need to actually be putting that writing in my book. But then I don't be putting it in my book all the time. Like sometimes I'm like, girl, you ain't writing even in your book. So like, so anyways, I feel like these are just really deep questions, have questions of their own, I guess is what I'm.
I get it. And I think, what you are describing too is cycles. I think it's okay as people just to have cycles. Sometimes like we're into something, sometimes we're not, and just embrace both part of those. Don't let either consume us, right? I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, can we please give the police department to the grandmothers, and how we talk about abolition and that with our children. So before we even go there, what is abolition? Like, what is abolitionism? What does that really mean in today's world?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically, when we talk about abolition, we've talked about the abolition of slavery, which in a lot of ways, I think we're still trying to abolish slavery, so much. Like, even talking about the police state, there's so much of the institutions and systems that are in place in our society that were created out of a slave society. And just because slavery ended, inherently these institutions didn't change, and the way power lives. So when I think about abolition, and definitely within the context of the prison industrial complex, and I'm very clear around like speaking to it as a whole ornate system, the police industrial complex connected to the prison industrial complex and the corporate, bodied industrial complex. All of these are inner working systems that really keep a system of oppression over most people and privileges certain groups in a variety of ways. And so when I think about abolition, and certainly in the conversations I've been having in Minneapolis since George Floyd was murdered specifically, has been more so interested definitely in removing systems of oppression, but also in giving resource and energy and imagination and creativity to what it is we want to dream and make into existence, And I think for me, so much of my resistance and liberatory work over the years has been in what I'm fighting to end and resist. And it really was around George Floyd that I started thinking about what ways am I policing myself? What ways have I been programmed to police myself, police others, punish myself, punish others? And us as Minneapolis residents and Minneapolis activists and abolitionists, we're confronted that the systems that we're trying to destroy or, sunset, is a system all of us have been raised deeply in. Yeah. So how do I actually live in practice of abolition for myself? And I called it erotics of abolition, actually, and started writing around how am I living in a relationship with myself that isn't judging and punishing and policing my existence. Because in order for me to actually embody it and create it for other people, I need to live it on a cellular level. So seeing that as like a tandem practice and how I create abolition in the world is abolition in myself, because I police myself, police my body, my pleasure, police my looks, my weight, all of things that, I have absorbed. And so anyways, like that's for me, like abolition to me, it's like I'm very curious about, yes, we definitely are working and I'm working to abolish all of these systems, but these systems have already colonized me, and I think that's the joy of like this book and kind of exploring it as kind of like this imaginal dream space that's intergenerational inherently, because it's a kid's book talking about grandmothers, So I think I'm living in the ways that elders and children both live in the future and in the ancestor realm. And how do we use that as a mechanism of abolition, because children know freedom inherently in their body and they can future it for us, and elders and know of times when our ancestors lived in spaces of freedom and embody it and found freedom within oppression. So that is my defining and constant defining of what abolition can be like. Because I think, with a lot of things like, you woke or you this or whatever, like the word can then sort of lose meaning because people think they know what it means.
Yep.
Or for even the world, like, let alone how are we defining these things for ourselves? So, yeah.
Oh, I think that's just so beautiful. You're brilliant. Just, I did not think to think about how I have, how I am oppressing myself because I have been colonized. And I think this book is super important as a place for parents who don't know how to talk about these things and reimagining the future and all of that can talk to their children. I have two little ones myself, and I'm constantly trying to figure out what is too much to talk about, what is not enough, like what am I being negligent and not addressing. And I think this is a beautiful starting place to open up the doors for those conversations, because especially as parents of Black and Brown children, we need to dive in to these conversations really, really early.
Yeah, the conversations, the kids I mean, think about us. Like, I was aware of race at a very young age. I was aware of being racialized. I was aware of being in a hierarchy of existence.
Yep.
And I think, Black folks are actually really good in general talking to our kids about race, And I think so much of what we've had to absorb is like very real terror and fear about how to protect ourselves and be aware of ourselves as racialized Black people. And I think like what I'm interested in cultivating, and I've been actually, in this generation, I'm a mother too, of like, how do I not put the burden of our society's effed upness while informing them of the reality of it,
That part. Yep.
And so I think that's the beauty of art, the beauty of poetry is that, and imagination and creativity is that we can give them the tools to validate that they are actually architects of the existence, and we are their co-architects. Like, I'm here to back up what y'all gonna figure out, because what we and what we've inherited has been extremely toxic and intends to maintain that toxicity, because it works for those who are in power. But I think we hold so much power. Young people, the collective, the elders, all of the people, the masses hold so much power. And how do we notify young people of the power they're connected to as they have to navigate these very toxic realities? Because I was just telling my brother this yesterday, talking specifically about white children, actually, and about how important it is for white people to actually talk to their kids about whiteness, because racist white people are definitely figuring out how to recruit, white minds into that kind of thinking and that kind of bigotry. So these so-called woke white folks and people who want to be liberal, they can't just be having these conversations of like, oh, everybody is the same and we don't see color. It's like, no, color. I want, and thinking about how then the burden tends to rely on Black folks and folks of color, because our children have to know this stuff, have to be clocking this stuff. And kids get to like sit out until they want to date a person of color, or they want to like, somehow be of help. And it's like, I was thinking of, sorry, get tangential. So if you're like, girl, ring it up.
No, you're good.
But I was talking about this artist, Ken Gonzalez Day, who is a photographer who is capturing the history of Mexican-American lynching that used to happen in California at the turn of the last century, right? And we often know about, Black lynching, but not about all of the other groups that were lynched. And, percentage-wise, Black people were lynched way more than other groups, but other groups were being lynched, including Mexican-Americans and Asian Americans and Jewish folks and whatnot. So anyways, what his work would do was he would take an image from a lynching and remove the lynched body. So instead of looking at the spectacle of violence on a Black or brown body, you're actually looking at the spectacle of white violence that is really the problem, right?
That part, yes.
And there's a way that, because people are getting to see the trauma and the drama and the violence on us, we are the focus, and white folks invisibilize behind that, right? So part, these conversations that I'm having is like, how do we give Black folks and young Black people the space to dream and imagine and heal for themselves and on behalf of us and our ancestral generations? Because we just carry the trauma through. The trauma don't dissipate with every birth. It's like, no, we just, have to carry it through, absorb it through, like betroth it through. and white folks betroth the privilege and the lack of, association with the violence that they either perpetrate or benefit from.
Yep.
So I think that's, kind of like to answer this question about how do we talk to our kids, it's like, how do we give them permission that this isn't, y'all need to focus on healing and joy and imagination. And I feel like there's so many wonderful, thinkers and creative, like, NAP ministry and other people who are like, yeah, like, no, we need to rest. We need to catch up on our spirit and whatnot. And I think also giving white people the invitation and the burden of figuring their stuff out, because, when we move ourselves out of the equation, what's there is their white violence and their white trauma and drama and chaos that really is some, like, I mean, don't get me tangential because I'm already there, but what this society needs, it's like, yeah, we need like 1 million psychiatrists and psychotherapists and cultural healers and astrologers and tarot readers. And, I was just saying this recently, because there's just such, and, pastors and folks who are actually healer pastors, not, and I don't know, I don't need to put that qualification.
But I feel you.
Yeah. It's like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And, sometimes people in those positions of power, aren't necessarily leaning into healing. And so anyways, just thinking of all of these, mass shootings, all of these sorts of kind of trying to retract access to information and stuff like that. A lot of that is, examples of how mentally destroyed and spiritually destroyed so many people are as a baseline in our society.
Yes.
And y'all want to give these people more access to guns and more access to, no work and no resources and I don't know, and no books, more guns, less books. Like that's what we doing.
Right.
And
right. And this essentially brings us back to what I was saying earlier, like, all the work that an individual can do can only be so much if the society at large is sick, So there's always going to be work to be done, but I'm so grateful for people like you who use your art, your creativity, your imagination to inspire others to do the same. And then also with this book to allow us to pass that on to the generations that's coming behind us, to dream bigger and brighter than we did. So hopefully the power can come back to the masses where it belongs and things can change for the better. I'm so happy that I got a chance to talk to you. You are just brilliant. I can listen to you talk forever and ever and ever. So thank you for your time. I appreciate you so, so much.